Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And in today's episode, we're talking recent plays. We are taking a moment to sort of regroup, but also explore some of the games that we've been playing recently. And we have some stuff that has made it to the table that we're really excited about. Games like Arcs. Can you go anywhere on the internet without hearing Arcs lately? Probably not. But Jake played. I'm excited to hear his thoughts. Jake also has recent plays of games like Food Chain Magnate, the new El Grande, a Decision Space favorite, onto the table with Jake in a new coat of paint, the Wavelength app, and more cool stuff. I've also played a sleeper Knizia game, and we'll give you thoughts on a game we recently covered on the show that I think we were both pretty excited about. Veil of Eternity. So we'll see if we remain excited.
Cool. Yeah, I can't wait. And people in our Discord know that I've kind of had a crazy week. We had a flooding in St. Louis, and unfortunately I got water in my basement that I'm still dealing with as we record this. We tried to record once, and that was like immediately as the flood was happening. So we had to abandon ship. So we're recording this a little later in the week. I'm going to just put it up straight after recording without editing at all. So just be aware that's going on if you're listening to this and it doesn't sound, if there's more ums and likes and whatever than normal. So Brendan, don't mess up.
I'll do my best. I'm getting him out. I'm getting him out now.
Yeah, perfect. So before we get into those recent plays, check out this new review we just got.
Titled My Favorite Podcast.
Do you want to read it?
I do. It's from Deguy_4. And Deguy is located in Australia. This is a 5-star review, and it says, as an aspiring game designer, this podcast is a must listen. I really enjoy their deep dives into games, and their critical analysis in this space is unparalleled. Most useful for me, however, are the What We Talk About episodes. It's really helped me articulate my thoughts about games. That's just, as an aside, amazing. That's definitely what we're going for. Back to the review. Before I would say, I don't like the game. Now I can say, I feel like this mechanic is over-centralized and there is a lot of mechanical artifice. I had a blast participating in the Game Design Jam too. Keep up the awesome work. Thank you so much, Deguy. It's amazing hearing reviews like this. Thank you for taking the time to leave it on Apple Podcasts. To any of you listening, please, if you enjoy the show, tell your game group about it. And if you have the time, leave us a podcast and we'll read it out on the show, especially if it's 5 stars. But we'll read it anyway. And also, we're going to review your review, Deguy. You get a 10 out of a 10. It's great.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 10 out of 10 too. And I particularly like the idea that the guy is telling, his friends that like the game is over centralized with too much mechanical artifice. Because I just feel if you're not a Decision Space listener, it's just like get out of my house.
Yeah. Even in my house, my wife would be like, get out of the room.
What'd you just say to me?
Yeah. Amazing. Also, before we get into our recent plays, thank you to Guy. And we want to just make sure you as a listener know what's coming up so you can play along with us or just have a sense for what's in the weeks ahead. So as a quick preview, we have a Tikal deep dive coming up. And now maybe you're a longtime listener and you're going to say, but didn't you do a mini review of Tikal on an episode where you covered all Kiesling and Kramer games? Yes. But we're going to go really deep because it's a game Jake and I have played a lot. We think we have more to talk about. It's a really important game. Then we're going to do another game design problems solved episode where we talk about game design problems and how specific games solve them. So I'm really excited about that. And then we're going to cover Azul Summer Pavillion. We'll probably juxtapose it with base Azul. And both Tikal and Azul Summer Pavillion are on Board Game Arena in some form, beta, full release, or alpha. I think they're at least in beta. And Summer Pavillion's full release now. So you can go there and play these games. And if you need people to play them with, you can always come to our Discord, find players to play these games with you. You can find a link to our Discord in the show notes. Wow. Recent plays. Okay.
All right. Let's start with the big one, Arcs.
Okay.
I had the opportunity to play Arcs at a friend's game night recently. And
wait, what is Arcs?
Arcs is a game that needs no introduction at this point, right? It's the biggest thing in board gaming today. Cole, Worley, and Leader Games' newest project, fresh off the press, is Arcs. And I really wanted to record this podcast just so I could come on here and tell everyone, don't believe the hype. This game is terrible. I'm just kidding. That's not my actual opinion on the game. Uh, it's my view on Arcs is a lot more nuanced than that. But I had the opportunity to play it at a recent game night with Pete, who brought it out and was willing to teach it. Friend of the show, who's been on before, and then Jamie and another friend. And it's important context, I think, to know that Pete has played it a handful of times at that point. Kevin, who was in the game, had played it, I think, once or maybe twice before. And then Jamie and I were coming to it fresh. So, Arcs, I'm not going to explain all the rules in this game, but what it is essentially is a space game where you've got spaceships, you move around to planets, you can fight and roll dice in full on Ameritrashy style conflict goodness. Dice with hits and misses, and sometimes even self damaging results. But the core mechanic overarching everything in the game is sort of as Pete described it, it's not really a trick taking game, but it's a trick taking inspired action selection mechanism. So there's 4 suits in the game. Somebody will lead with a suit. You can either go on suit with them and try, if you're able to beat it, that has implications in the game. Or you could play on suit a lower and get a less powerful version of that action. Or you could play your card face down to kind of pivot and do a different action, but also a less powerful version of it than playing the card for its like full effect. So that's kind of what's going on in brief. And I have to say, if you're a fan of letter games and Cole Worley design stuff in general, I think Root is an absolute slam dunk. I think it's very likely to be many people's if you're a leader games fan, a Cole Worley fan, I think Arcs is very likely to be many people's favorite of his games, which is a high compliment since he's done a lot of beloved stuff, none more so than Root probably. I think if you're somebody who does not tend to gravitate towards Cole's designs, and I would count myself in that group, I just haven't got on great with Root or Pax Pamir, which are the 2 that I have the most experience with. I think that Arcs is still likely to be your favorite of leader games as games because is more accessible. It feels in some ways to me like less out on a limb from popular mainstream modern board games than some of his other works.
What makes it feel that way? Is it the trope space? Is it that you're just playing kind of in 4X space and there's a action selection mechanism that is fairly easy to grok, so you can find your footing more easily? Is that
I think
why?
that's what it is. I think it's more straightforwardly a Euros kind of like scoring thing. There's the way in which a person acquires points is the same across all players. I'm talking just about the base game. I have no experience with the expansion content, which is the campaign, and that may completely turn this all on its head. But just talking about the base game, it feels like the overall scoring objectives are pretty cool because players have a lot of control over like which of the possible scoring criteria will be scored in any given round of the game. But it'll be scored the same for everybody. So there isn't as much asymmetric stuff going on with at least how players are interacting with the game system. So I think that makes it easier to find your footing. And I also think the overarching action selection trick taking system is just implemented mostly very cleanly. It's easy to see it's not necessarily easy to like play out an entire hand, but when I play a card, I know exactly what I get to do on the board and like what the implication is of that. So this is not an easy game. This is not an accessible or an approachable game, but I do think of Cole's big box games, it's the most accessible of those I've played. So I think for those reasons, it's likely to be the best for many people who, even if you're not a fan of leader games, this would be where I would point you towards to give it a try. But that comes with the important caveat that you're not necessarily going to love this game if you haven't loved other leader game offering. It still feels very squarely like in line with, the other outputs and other titles of this game shop. If that makes sense.
Totally. How long was your play?
So we played it like within a single game night. I think our teach was probably right around 30 minutes, and the play probably right around 2 hours, which is short and important to know that this is a game that can be. It's a race to X points. So I
Sure.
think
Similar to
in
Root
the
in that
base
way.
game it was a race to 30 points, and we ended in round 3, which is the shortest I think that the game could ever go. And much more often it would end in round 4 or 5. So 2 hours, but probably could have been 2.5 or 3 hours, depending on how many rounds we played. So can I tell you some of the things I really enjoy about the game and some of the things that I didn't enjoy as much?
Totally.
Cool. So I think I was talking about this a little bit. I think the core action selection trick taking system is super fun, and it feels both incredibly rigid and also open. So I've heard a lot of people in some of the reviews I've read feel like one of the things that can rub people wrong about this game is you feel like you have a lack of agency about what's going on. I felt in this play like the world was my oyster. I felt like I had a lot of options available to me at any time, and I could do almost whatever I wanted, but it was difficult to know what I should be doing at any given time, and it was difficult to know, what would be the most efficient way to go about it. But I didn't feel like restrained in agency at all, which I think was good. So it felt like just hit a really nice, satisfying, like crunchy sweet spot of like being restricted by the trick taking system, but still having tons of agency within that to sort of like enact my will on the game and do what I wanted. So that's probably the most important thing. If you don't like that, you're not going to like this game, and I really like that. So that was very satisfying. Um, I think another thing I thought was just really neat, a smaller point, is this game has attacking. When you attack, I mentioned it's kind of Ameritrashy. You get to roll a certain number of dice. I think you roll one dice for each ship that you have. But it's really cool because you get to choose between 3 different types of dice. So you've got basically some dice that are low value, so you don't get to deal that many hits, but there's no possible way it could backfire on you. And then there's ones that deal a lot more hits and potentially reap bigger rewards, but very are likely to deal damage back at you. And then something in between. So I thought that was really cool because you got to kind of choose how
Yeah.
much potential risk versus reward you wanted in any given conflict. And I think that's an area in which, we were basically all just choosing the most crazy aggressive dice in all situations. But that felt like a place where it was just cool. And I think there'd be a lot of skill ceiling in trying, the more you could understand the game state, the more you could know whether you need to take a big risk or not. None
What a
of us
cool
were
way.
at that level, but that was so
Sure.
cool.
And what a cool way to take a mechanism that some portion of the audience is going to bounce off of, right? I really want to play arcs, but there's this randomized dice driven combat. And just even introducing a simple choice, I think helps someone who's a little bit less likely to enjoy a mechanism like that is going to be able to palate it a little bit more because having just that little taste of agency, I think makes the player feel more in control. It's so cool.
Yeah, I agree. I still think if you don't like random
Yeah, you're probably
dice,
not going to love
you're
it.
still not
You're
gonna
jumping in
dig
the
it
pool.
here
Yeah.
because you might be like, I'll choose the really risk averse dice, and then somebody else will
You
come in
get
and just
hammered.
blow you out with
Sure.
the more
Yeah.
risky dice. So that can, you can only like mitigate your engagement with those dice to some extent in the
Sure.
game, not completely.
Sure. That's
Um,
fair.
you could try, ask nicely. Please don't use those scary dice against me. But no guarantees with that approach. So I thought that was really cool too, and I think the scoring is really awesome. Basically, you get to choose the table will decide which of these 5 objectives score, or 5 or 6 different scoring criteria score in each round. So basically 3 score each round. In subsequent rounds, they score more points. So there's kind of, without being like a beat you over the head catch up mechanism, I could make people feel a little more in the game later in the game if they're doing poorly. And the way it works is really cool. So if you lead a trick, you get the opportunity to choose one of those scoring markers. However, you can only choose one if you have like the icon in your hand that you need to score that. So that's a big way that the game says, like, yeah, you have agency, but not, you're going to have to figure out based on like what you get dealt in the start of your hand, what you're going for, if you want to pick one. But it says that if you do that, then the value of your cards reduced to 0, meaning that anybody who plays on suit gets to take like the full power action or action. Basically, you get more actions based on the number of cards. So everybody will beat you if you take that powerful choose a scoring criteria. So love that. So the core of the game play, very fun, very satisfying,
so
felt cleanly designed. There are definitely things about the game that I didn't vibe with completely. One of the big ones is there's like this, it's very similar to PAX Premier, if you've played that, where there's like a court of cards that come out of the game that are like really powerful cards that you can add to your tableau, and you have to like put basically workers onto those cards, and then on a subsequent turn, if you have a majority on a card, you can claim it if you use the action to claim, and that's fine. I just typically don't like it in games as much when lots of rules text heavy cards are coming out of a deck, and especially when they're moving around the table a lot. It made it really difficult for me in that first play to track like who can do what and what was happening with people's tableau. Like, I don't want to get up around the table and read them. Pete was saying that once the way that they're designed, there's a lot of kind of like iterations on the same theme, so that becomes clearer much quicker. But that's just something I generally don't vibe with, and found it pretty difficult and annoying to engage with here. So I didn't like that as much. There were definitely feel bad moments too, like I mentioned with the dice rolling. I basically, the pivotal moment of our game, like I went and attacked Jamie and just blew myself up, and then he came and attacked me and just rolled like a ton of hits, and that was the game right there at the end of 2 hours of play. Which, that's just something, there's no getting around it. That is the type of game you're playing. All that.
Did it feel dramatic though?
Fun. It didn't feel it would have felt dramatic if like Jamie wasn't already the runaway leader.
Okay, sure.
And so that's kind of the final thing I have to share about the game, which is that our game ended after 3 rounds because Jamie was at like 29 points, and he found a way to squeak out 1 extra point at the very end of the game, and everybody was kind of like, thank God we don't have to play a 4th round, because he was at like 29 points, I was at like 12, and the other 2 players 0. And the other 2 players were the players who had played the game before. So,
wow.
Every time you play this game, it's going to be different. That's what you're signing up for, like telling a new story. We had just some weird things happen in the game. Like, people kept choosing the same scoring criteria. Jamie kept picking a single criteria, and we played with the Leaders and Lore mini expansion, where we start with some asymmetric power, which apparently the rulebook stresses like, do not use this in your first game. I would agree with that. That was a really bad decision, because it gave us such strong asymmetries and stuff that when you don't know the system well, you kind of have to lean into them. It felt like to me. So my asymmetry was that like every time I declared a scoring criteria, I had to give somebody one of those court cards that are difficult to get. So I'm never going to do that.
Wow. Do you have a bonus?
Yeah. So the way that it works is like you get one like a powerful bonus that nobody else gets, but like something else that everyone gets to do is worse for you. So that was really like over centralizing. It felt like in the way we were interacting with the game the first time playing. So Jamie kept picking the criteria. I was never picking a criteria, and the other guys, I guess, were unable to like win tricks enough to do anything. So it was just wonky. It was a wonky, weird play. Interesting game. I'd be happy to play it again. It was, not the most satisfying play in the world. The jury was always going to be out after a single play, but that's my experience with ARCs. If you want a much more thorough, nuanced review than this, I highly recommend the Game Brain podcast. They just reviewed it this week as of recording, and I think all those guys claim to have 20 or 30 plays each. So go over there if you want like the more like going deep in the game perspective.
I really appreciate your overview, Jake. And I think the fact that as someone who I know really isn't a fan of the style of games that Cole Worley is going for, the sort of politically driven games in which players are making decisions about who you should be investing your sort of time into beating down or where you should be pushing and really having to work the table. I think it's a huge win that for ARCs. In this episode, you're saying I would like to play it again.
Yeah, I would like to play it again. I probably want to play the base game if I played it again.
Yeah.
Or start a campaign. But
I mean, these are not games made to be played once. I think you have to play them more than once to get the texture of the game, to really understand the decision space and make meaningful decisions.
I fear the campaign might lean into the stuff that I didn't like as much in my first play, but it sounds cool and like a novel way of doing a campaign too. So
I want to play this game so bad.
That's ARCs. Yeah, you got to check it out.
Okay, I have one comment, which is the cover for ARCs, amazing. It's almost like Mass Effect, as if it was actually a graphic novel released in 2012 or something. Kyle Farron's art is really good. It's sort of darker. My comment I want to make is, Jake, have you ever noticed that on the cover of Root, 3 of the 4 species of animals on it are smiling in some way? You've like the cat's grinning in this huge grin. The raccoon's obviously being raccoony and kind of like, I don't know, smirking. The mouse is smitten with himself. The birds are serious. But when you look at ARC's cover, no one's having a good time. You have these aliens who are all frowning. You have, I can't make a comment for this bug guy. He could be smiling. Who could say? That you have one figure smiling, who's this sort of humanoid, maybe android, holding a tablet. So phone addiction's real. Then there's this alien in the bottom right. He could be smiling. Granted, I'm not familiar with his species. And then just these 2 like very crabby looking robots or androids. So it's like sad, but somehow it just makes me all more excited.
Space.
It is Spark. It's Stark space. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely.
So anyway, that's
cool.
that's what I have to say about ARCs. Maybe I'll play it more and talk more about it on the podcast later. But I think there's honestly better sources to go to.
Cool. Well, I think then can we tennis back and forth?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So like Jake hit it my way. I'm going to hit one back.
Yeah, I'll talk for 25 minutes. I'll give you 2 or 3.
I'll take 5. 2 or 3. Okay. I don't even get 5. I get 2 or 3. Great. Perfect. I want to talk about Marabunta. So Marabunta is a Reiner Knizia game recently released that is a roll and write game. But it's not really a roll and write game. But it is really a roll and write game. But it's not, because Marabunta is clearly, Knizia saw in the zeitgeist this idea of, but there should be roll and writes where you just get to write on the board where there's a shared space. And that's what Marabunta is. It's an I split you choose game area control game where every turn you draw some tiles, and it's only for 2 players. And one of the players separates the tiles into 2 piles, and you're sort of choosing between adding control of your color to these different regions on the board, these different areas, or gaining, I'm simplifying it, obviously, or gaining scoring potential for those areas if you win them. So there's good tension in the middle between, okay, I can win this, but I'm not going to score many points, versus I'm going to score all these points, but have I invested enough to win? I would say Marabunta is really playing with a lot of the tempo and sort of, it feels a lot like his tile laying games, like Blue Lagoon. You get a sense of, okay, if I fill in this one space, I'm incrementally closer enough compared to my opponent that I could probably cut them off. There's some Knizia fans who have talked about Marabunta sort of being, I would say, the Knizia release of the year. This like outsizedly wonderful, charming gem of a game that will crash onto your table like a meteor and change your life forever. I did not experience it that way. I thought it was charming, if not perfect, and I would rather probably play a game like Blue Lagoon. It travels better. It's cute. It has good ideas. Every I feel like every game Knizia designs for hobby gaming lately, as of late, that I've played is just tight, and that's really refreshing. Like the math is obviously just so stalwartly perfect that it's really tough to find criticism there. But the game didn't bring a lot new for me in terms of Knizia's own sort of stylistic choices in the tiling genre. It was fine. I liked it. It was good-ish. I don't know. If this is one, it sounds like what?
Less Rhino Kniz, more Oh No Kniz.
Yeah, I don't know. My expectations were high too, right? Like I came into it with a lot of hype being built behind it. I'll also mention it's a very affordable game. It's a small box, 2-player roll and write. There's probably even more there. I've only played it once, so I'll hold my reservation fully, but I haven't been excited to go back to it. And typically when there's a small box game that's quick playing, that plays well at 2, Maya and I will just devour it. We'll just play it 20 times in 10 days. And that has not been my experience with this one. So I don't know. I'm sharing this as a recent play experience, as a cautionary tale that if you want to jump on the Marabunta hype train, maybe just do a little research. It might not be exactly what you're hoping. And if you haven't played some of Knizia's other tiling games that work well at 2, like Babylonia, maybe start there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Are there other recommendations? But Marabunta is significantly lighter than Babylonia. What do you say?
It is. I mean, it's hard,
So
right? Because
maybe
Babylonia
more
is like a medium box.
I know you've played Babylonia with your family, but I don't think a lot of non-gaming family out there would.
I think that's
be
fair.
Able to get it on Babylonia.
Yeah, and Babylonia plays 2 to 4. Marabunta is just for 2. There's some fiddliness with Marabunta because you're doing some set collecting with cupcakes, and there's some crates that give you other special powers. I think I would have an easier time teaching Babylonia to my non-regular game playing sister than Marabunta, but that could be wrong. I'm not sure. It's also, they're very different packages.
Yeah,
right? Marabunta is going to fit in your backpack, and Babylonia might fit in your backpack, but it'll be the only game that goes in there.
Nice. Yeah. Okay. So maybe a slight miss from the
for me a slight miss. Yeah.
That's what we do. We just talk about our opinions.
That is So it's a huge miss.
Yeah. Absolute disaster.
A disaster of a game. He never should have designed
it. We have to ask the question: has Knizia fallen off?
Completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so funny. Yeah. I was really hopeful. It sounds cool.
Yeah.
I Split You Choose is tough though. There's a lot of downtime, right? Where the other player is sort of making decisions around the piles. I don't know. It's a miss. I'm going to talk about misses today.
There's nothing about that explanation that makes me excited to try that. But honestly, I think part of it is just like roll and write fatigue has not worn off for me yet.
Yeah.
Like even people are really raving about My City roll and write, and I just couldn't get excited about that right now. I
would just rather play My City.
Yeah, right. Me too. So maybe that might be part of it for you. In a similar game where you're actually putting tiles on the table might feel more satisfying.
Yeah. There, imagine that. The cool little chits in Babylonia, the tokens, they feel good to touch. A dry erase pen, it's kind of fiddly. I don't know. But yeah, that's Marabunta from Reiner Knizia.
All right. I won't spend as much time on this next one, even though it's a big game too that people have been asking for us to review on this show for ages. But I finally had my first play experience of Food Chain Magnate. So if you don't know, Food Chain Magnate is a Splotter game. This is actually the first Splotter game I've ever played. So no, that's not true. I played Bus. I forgot. It's the second Splotter game that I've ever played. Notorious Dutch company that says if you can't lose the game on your first turn, why have a first turn? Which is a hilarious philosophy to have, because I think just no other board games that exist subscribe to that philosophy at all outside of Splotter games.
Sure.
And Food Chain Magnate, I think, lives up to it. So what this game is you are running a fast food joint on a kind of suburban seeming street. the game plays out over 3 main phases. The first phase is you get to play out staff for your restaurant. You're the CEO in this game, so you get to hire, cooks, marketers, waitresses, etc. Everything you need to have a successful fast food chain. Then, after you played your cards, it goes around in a kind of a standard board game, once around the table where everybody gets to run their engine or whatever the cards. They get to activate all the cards they played. Maybe that means they're by recruiting more staff, cooking food, making drinks, etc. Advertising, that's a big part of it. And then it goes to phase 3, which is your dinner time phase. And that's where the game auto runs, where different houses on the board will require different food, and they'll go to the restaurant that is some combination of closest to them and cheapest price point. So every space away adds 1 to the total, and then also you factor in the price that each of the foods at. They'll buy from whichever company or whichever restaurant is closest to them. All the houses buy, and then all the advertising runs, which determines what houses will want in the next round of play. And you go forward with that, make as much money as you can, and the game will end once the bank runs out of money twice.
Okay, so what do you think? Did you get to drink? Would you drink this milkshake again?
I was really pleasantly surprised with Food Chain Magnate. I think I was hesitant to play it just because I was expecting it to be a lot more complicated and more impenetrable than it actually was once I started playing the game. We played this game 3 players in 90 minutes flat.
Heck yeah. Nice.
Which is also a lot less time than I thought it would take to play the game.
You thought it'd be like a 4-hour play.
That's what I was worried about. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess 90 minutes is fast. People in the Discord were saying, that's quick.
Yeah.
But also it seemed like, optimistically, we played it correctly. The game has a mechanic in where everybody secretly chooses $100, $200, or $300 card at the beginning of the game. And then they reveal them going into phase 2. And that's how much money collectively goes back into the bank. Okay. So 2 of us picked 100 and 1 of us picked 200. So only 400 went back in the bank. That could have been 900 going back in the bank, which is probably would result in 2 more rounds or 3 more rounds of play. So, we had a shorter game perhaps than average, but yeah, it was quick. One thing I don't like about the game, really my biggest criticism with the game, is that I think that philosophy of like you could lose on the first round is dumb. So it seems like what you have to do is basically take a recruiter or I can't remember what it is. There's like 2 cards that basically those are the 2 viable strategies in the base game. And in your first couple of turns in the game, you have to basically follow a script or else you're just going to get left in the dust. Like if you're like, I'm going to get this pizza cook instead of the recruiter or whatever the other card is that I'm forgetting now, you're done.
Okay, this feels bad, right? This is what I feel like splatter games need to avoid. Yes, losing on the first turn and a scripted play is just then the first turn doesn't matter, right? If there's just one thing you should be doing or maybe 2, then just start it on second turn and give me the thing, right?
Yeah. And I totally agree with you. I think that's having to memorize and like learn different lines of play, and it's totally that kind of game if you want to be successful. I mean, I think I'm being, too broad about this. I'm sure that super advanced level players like, no, there's like edge cases where you would want to stray from that pattern. And I think I've also heard the expansion that we didn't play with might open things up a little bit more. But yeah, like that does nothing for me. So I agree with you.
Do you feel like you were making in the mid game, once things had sort of shaken out, you'd like made this decision around how long the game was going to be simultaneously with everyone, kind of had this more scripted feeling opening. Do you feel like you were making interesting decisions sort of in terms of the economy and how you were approaching undercutting your opponents? Were you having to think about what you thought they would do and then sort of make decisions based on that?
A little bit. I think that came in the most with pricing food.
Sure.
So there's one card you can get that like increases the cost of your food plus 10, which is a ton. And I ended up winning the game, and I think I did in part because there was one round where the market was really oversaturated with soda or beer or whatever it was that we were trying to sell. And I knew that at least one of the other players was going to have a hard time making very much of it. So I was able to see that and pick my spot to use the luxury manager so I could sell, I could basically
everyone wants beer. Beer's
surge
$30
charge
a pint.
beer
Yeah.
and price gouge everybody. And I made a ton of money that round. That ended up, I think, just putting me over the edge in the end of the game. So that was cool.
That's fun.
It was weird. The game feels so generous in the number of employee cards that you're getting. So I was like recruiting so many employee cards every round that I felt like I had, and I think that was the script line that I picked was like, if you go with this line, the video I watched beforehand told me you'll be equipped to maneuver easily. Like that's the strength of it. You'll have so many different cards recruited that whatever the situation demands of you, you'll be able to kind of shift. So that felt like right on with what I was doing in the game. So that was weird. I wasn't expecting to feel the game being generous at all, but it oddly can be a really generous game when things are going your way. It's like I was just getting cards, and then that was helping me get just tons of money. So I never felt stressed. One player, obviously, which I think is inevitable, is going to be all because of the system. Like you're going to stutter early, and then you're screwed.
Interesting.
So I maybe would have had a word. I was joking about this on the Discord too, where I have to play the game and lose terribly, and then I'll be able to give an honest opinion of how I feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in winning the game, you're like, this is great. Yeah. Like I am the best food chain manager ever. So that was, my experience with Food Chain Magnate. I would play it again. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, this is the last thing I wanted to say. It's interesting. So it's a very much an economic game, right? Where you want to kind of maneuver to take advantage of things, but it feels much more like in between something like a pipeline that's like you kind of have to just, in my experience, focus on like one thing the whole time and just do it really well. And Smartphone Inc., where you can just completely in between rounds. Like I was selling luxury phones, now I'm selling like the cheapest phones ever, and I'm manufacturing 1 billion of them. You could just like switch on a dime. It was something in between that where you could shift pretty quickly, but a big shift is going to take you maybe a round or two, causing you to need to have some foresight about the way the game is going if you're not the one driving it through crazy marketing and everything. So that was, I think, a pretty satisfying place to be for an economic game where you can shift to take advantage of stuff, but you definitely can't move everything on a dime. It's not like turning a boat. Sense. It's like turning a bus.
Sure.
Like bus.
Nice time. Hey.
Okay. So that's that one.
Yeah. Okay. Ball's back in my court. I want to talk about, Jake, Veil of Eternity. So this is a game that we talked about in our episode where actually you went to Geekway Mini and you played this game and you were like, this is cool.
I think Geekway. I wanted to actually, I'll let you talk about the game, but I wanted to frame with this question.
Okay.
After Geekway, we played a ton of Nemalia and Veil of Eternity at the same time because they're both games I'd played, talked about on this show. And we're like, well, we'll check them out more on Board Game Arena. And I definitely got the sense early on that you were much more digging Veil of Eternity and not so much Nemalia. That
totally shifted.
Yeah, that was going to be my
completely.
question.
Yeah, completely shifted. So they're really different games. Nemalia is a puzzly little tiling game in which you're overlaying tiles in pursuit of these shifting objectives. So you have to build a board and then try to have your board be in the right configuration when certain objectives are scored. But you know what all the objectives are. So it's a cool little tactical puzzle game that if you haven't heard of, you should definitely try on Board Game Arena, or just I recommend it. It's a great game. Veil of Eternity is it's really an engine-ish building, card-driven game where you're collecting these gems of different colors, 1, 3, and 6 value gems. But you can only have 4 gems at a time, no matter the color. no matter the value. And then there's these different types of cards. So there's sort of, I don't know, it's not very thematic. Green cards, dragon cards, air cards, fire cards, water cards, I think. And they have these different effects and different costs, and you're essentially discarding cards to get money and then using that money to buy cards that you're then going to use for immediate effects or effects that will happen every turn. So it's an engine building game. Veil of Eternity, maybe at its most sort of base level, is kind of selling itself as Splendor meets beginner's Magic the Gathering or something, but not really. But just because there's so much rules live on cards, right? The game lives on the cards live in your deck. Jake winced, but I think it's fair.
Yeah,
it's fair enough.
Okay.
It's not combat driven. It's a race.
It feels like it feels like that midpoint.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
The magnanimous of you. So when I first played Veil of Eternity, I was really excited because I felt like there were interesting combos that you could bring together between different cards, and I felt there were meaningful and nuanced decisions around, do I want to summon this or do I want to trash it for money, and interesting timing problems that you had to think about, and potentially even, okay, that card would be really good for Jake. I need to just take it, right? I need to draft that card even though I can't do anything with it and throw it in the trash so I can get money.
But you always do something with it, right?
You can do something
for
with
money.
It. Trash for money. Yeah, right. So you have the vehicle to hate draft. I was excited about it. Our first few games, I think there was this really vibrant sort of driving energy to the game that felt cool because you sort of didn't necessarily know how many points you were going to be able to score 3 or 4 turns from now. So it gave the game this fun sense of momentum of what cards are going to come up and can I make those work with my engine. But the more we played, Jake, the more I felt that the game felt a little bit, wow, we're going to use the word scripted twice in one episode, I guess. But it felt a little scripted. I made these opening decisions and then I had to chase that strategy and hope that the cards that I needed would come up. And if they didn't, I felt that luck played sort of a greater role than I would like in the type of game that this is. I'll mention that we were primarily playing at 2 players where you see fewer cards. So there's a chance that it would be mitigated if you played at a higher player count. But I don't know. It felt way more linear by the 4th or 5th or 6th play than I ever imagined it would in my 1st and 2nd and 3rd. And I'm bummed because I like games like this where you can pull together cards of different types and kind of find these emergent synergies, you hope. But in the Veil of Eternity, I found the emergent synergies aren't so much there. It's really straightforward.
Totally. It almost like we covered Villagers way back in the day, where it just tell you like, yeah, it's a combo. You just have to have exactly this card and exactly this card.
I printed it on the card for you.
Yeah, right. And it says on the card, that's your combo.
Yeah.
And this felt one step like that. Yeah, which is like, yeah, the pink cards all combo with the other pink cards.
Yeah, that's fun.
Not
so much.
I agree with you almost entirely. I love so much about the core game design. I think it's super fun. I love the way that the money economy is like, you can only have 4 different gems and the gems come in different values, and discarding different cards gives you a different combination of gems.
Yeah.
Super satisfying fun. But once we played it on, with repetitive games, it very quickly became just a case of like, did you find combo pieces or not? And you have zero agency over that because you just have to draw them, and you have to draw them when you're the first person to pick.
Yeah.
And that's it. So
I completely agree. And I think it's a lot of that game structure is what makes those initial plays fun, because you're making cool decisions around how you're collecting money or making fun decisions around what cards to pitch or not. And that it tickles your brain in a great way. But then once you've done that, and the structure fades into the rote pattern of play, then the decisions you're making are so straightforward that they're not really decisions at all.
Yeah.
There's usually an optimal decision. So the Veil of Eternity, I would say try it. I'm really excited to see what Eric Hong, the designer, does next. This is from Mandu Games. It's a beautiful presentation. I get why this game is popular, but for me, it didn't stand up to repeat plays in the way I want a sort of card-driven game, like the Veil of Eternity, to do.
Yeah, fun for player 2 on Board Game Arena. Might as well check it out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wonder if it's almost like it just needs same system,
different deck.
Redesign the cards. Yeah. Like Veil of Eternity 2.0 or, the second iteration in this system, I would love to check out.
Yeah. And all it needs is for the strategies, like you said, to crisscross through the different card types. So you can have a sort of base strategy in any given type. Oh, I know red cards generally do this, but then there's nuanced strategic paths that this red strategy can move into.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it's just kind of like, I'm doing the red thing.
Wonder also if like the reason it's so hard to put my designer hat on to like balance this is like all the red cards, the way the game works, discard for the same gem type.
Yeah.
It almost might want to have like card split in half where at the bottom it says like or discard it for this. Because it's just weird having the most powerful cards are like the black cards and they also discard for the
most
best
money
gem reward. So you just always or almost always just would snag it.
Yeah.
Because there's no trade-off. Either you hate draft the most powerful thing and get the best reward, or you just use the most powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the Veil of Eternity.
Cool. All right. The last thing I want to talk about, Brendan, this last weekend, I had my annual disc golf trip with my friends. We call it the Star Hole Challenge. We do it all over the place. Well, not really either. So far, it's been
Star Hole Challenge sounds like a space opera. Like we're back in Ark's world.
Yeah,
I love it.
So we've done it either in Kansas City or St. Louis, which is where we're all based. Except for one friend who flew in from San Diego. So we have dreams of going.
People who traveled for the Star Hole Challenge.
Yeah. My friend Will, shout out, came all the way down from San Diego to play 72 holes of disc golf with us over the weekend. And we stayed at an Airbnb to give my wife some space, even though we were here in the St. Louis area. We were actually in St. Charles, just 30 minutes away. And where Geekway takes place.
I'm familiar with St. Charles.
Yeah, you've been there. Yeah, we ate at the same barbecue place. We were like stayed at an Airbnb right on Main Street, that area with like the bricks and stuff.
That's awesome.
It's cool.
It's beautiful, I bet. Yeah.
So anyway, I bring that up to say not only was I doing disc golfing, which was super fun, but in the evening at the Airbnb, we were getting up to some board games, and it was super fun. I felt like I was going back in time. So a lot of two of these folks I had lived with previously, and were in, just had in a phase of my life where we would mostly just only play Catan. We actually did a little bit of Magic the Gathering Commander, and like the games of Catan we would play together would just go off the rails right away. It just like, oh, by the way, like you screwed me over on Tuesday, so like I'm going to use the next 2 hours to just get back at you.
I will never trade with you. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I thought, like, with this group of people, we had 5 people. I have the perfect game, and I bust out my new edition of El Grande and taught everyone. Played on night 1, went well. Everything was fine. People had a good time. It was a good game. They wanted to bring it back on night 2, which I was, delighted by, as like excited that people wanted to play again. And then having like just got their hands around the system just a little bit, like that second game went off the rails so fast. It's just a complete and utter shit show. One of my friends, and in his defense, not that he would feel that this behavior needs to be defended in any way, he was quite proud of it. He was a little bit jet lagged before the trip. He had just got back, like just days before driving to St. Louis from Kansas City. He had got back from like a many week international trip. So he was like jet lagged. We'd been in the sun, for 8 hours, like 90-degree heat. He was also drinking IPAs, and we're playing this game. And every time anybody did anything that he felt hurt him or slighted him in any way,
which is everything anyone ever does.
He was keeping a literal shit list on his notes app on his phone and adding like Jake, you got 2.5. That's like number 1. Like that means I'm coming for you. And he was being pretty obnoxious with his shit list the whole game, until another player just made like the most spiting his own nose to just absolutely demolish the shit list player. And it's like, just looked at him, just like, and from that point on, did everything he could on his turn to, take down my friend Will, who's in from San Diego. He's like, turn his whole game to that. Obviously, it was interesting because like El Grande surprisingly holds up really well to somebody trying to
It's a
destroy
really
a single
irrational
player.
behavior. Yeah.
Because there's not really that much you can do as one player to one player. It took, however, when he was like, okay, I'm actually just going to start feeding points to other players. That's when the game can't really hold up to that. So it was hilarious. I know probably listeners of this podcast are not fans of that kind of like clear
Irrational play.
and present irrational play, nor am I. But just being in the company of old
sounds
friends,
like a blast.
and just like it was like he was basically doing the same thing. Like, I have to do this because otherwise no one will respect me next time we play this. Like we were back in.
During the hidden disc selection of the Castillo, was he just like shouting at everyone?
Yeah, I mean, basically, yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I love it. That was awesome.
I
would never want all my plays to be that way, but occasional punctuated, cherry of irrational cherry, it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. It worked out well for me because I was the recipient of many unearned point. I was like the fourth person to go in the round, and I was like, well, normally the king card is not available at this point, but
which you also don't need because you're quite good at El Grande anyway. I know, so that's great. So how do you feel like the new version, like the art, how does it sit on the table? It's lovely.
It is lovely. To me, it's a lateral move. Like, sure, I like the Byeee's old game. Like, it just makes me feel like it is of its era, and having like a glossy set of paint on it. I don't think that's worse, but it's not better. The Castillo's kind of cool because it has a door you can slide open, and all of them like rush out, which is that's cool. Pretty nice actually.
Dramatic moment.
Yeah, a little dramatic. No complaints with the new edition.
But you don't have King and the Sad Boy to sit on the table, the cover of the box, and set the mood.
If I had an older edition of the game, I would definitely not recommend anyone upgrade. But just I didn't have it, and now it's in print again, and that's a win.
Cool. Well, that's awesome. I'm glad you had a great play of El Grande.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess, so I have one more thing to mention, and I'll be quick about it. This is a recent play, but this is really mini recent plays. So I'm going to bookend Knizia and mention that Maya and I have embarked upon our third My City Legacy campaign play. This time we're playing on Board Game Arena. It is not going well for me. I'm losing by about 20 points to Maya. But I will say, so longtime listeners of the show will know that Jake and I love My City. But we also have spent, I would say, the better half of a year extolling the virtues of My City Eternal Game, which is the back of the board that is sort of the best of the game that you can play as a standalone game. So if I just in an idle afternoon want to play My City or want to introduce a fun, light tiling game to a group of people, I'll say, let's play My City. But I mean the Eternal Game. So in my memory, Jake, before playing the Legacy game, I had felt that it was a really intense, delightful experience that shifted really quickly, but at the end of the day, maybe lacked some of the rigor and excitement of the Eternal Game. And I will say that is mostly still true, but I'm shocked how much the game really does change. And mostly what I mean by this is I've probably played well over 100 games of the Eternal Game at this point. Like I know that I have. And the decisions around tiling within
you're nothing if not self-aware.
Yeah, what can you do? Within tiling within the set sort of grid that's there in the forest, you get to make a lot of the same similar decisions, and that's fun because you can really maximize and sink your teeth into the puzzle, thinking about what tiles haven't come out yet, laying out in your brain just every tile that's going to be there. I find it to be a delightful exercise. The Legacy campaign and the part that we're at just blows the board open. The grid there's almost no forest left at the point that we're playing, which if you haven't played My City means you can place almost anywhere. And this sheer openness and the shifting of scoring right now, Jake, this is a spoiler. If you don't want to be spoiled in My City, fast forward your podcast by 30 seconds. I'm going to count to 3, 1, 2, 3. There's no contiguous color scoring right now, Jake, and it just changes everything. It's like it doesn't feel like the same game. It's so wide open, and I find it just really delightful. I think the more that I play my city, which apparently is just hundreds and hundreds of times at this point, the more delightful of a game I find it to be. It's charming, it's interesting. I've often said that if this game was on Windows 95, it would be as popular as Tetris. Or it could have sort of reached that peak if it came out at the right point in time. I still feel that way. This game is brilliant. Rhino Caniz will always be Rhino Caniz, and it is a huge win. If you haven't played it, I think you should give it a try. Try out the Eternal game if you just want to taste, or if you want to just dive into the Legacy game. I think it's a great way to spend 24 plays of a board game that's really awesome. So yeah, that's my city Legacy.
All right. The last thing I wanted to say is with my friends, I also had the opportunity to play Wavelength on the app. One of my buddies that was here for disc golf, actually the same one, the Irrational Player, had a great idea, which was to check out the Wavelength app, which he had already downloaded. And what the Wavelength app does is it turns the game from a competitive game to a cooperative one where everybody's working together to solve the clue. And I actually think I preferred Wavelength as a cooperative mode to a competitive one, just because then everybody gets to earnestly try to decipher clues instead of half the people either staying silent or, being obnoxious, trying to throw the other team off, which can be fun in the right time. But I really enjoyed it in the cooperative mode. The app works great. It has even some like really solid emoji sound effects that are worth checking out. So I just did want to throw that in there too, not to overlook the Wavelength app. If you like Wavelength and want a great quick game to pull out at a restaurant or when you're hanging around friends, almost like a Jackbox party pack type of thing, I think you could do way, way worse than checking out Wavelength. So that's one last little recommend. And I know a friend of mine in our Laughing Table friends is close friends and I think is like a professional partner with somebody who developed that app. So shout out to them because we had a great time playing with it. That's what we'll leave you with for this week's episode of Decision Space. Thank you so much for tuning in. I apologize if it's not as polished as normal. If you want more Decision Space, listen to any of our other episodes. Check us out on Discord. There's a link in the description of this podcast. And please, 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 if you have time, leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening and have a great week. Bye.